All right, we're now live. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Zunaira, and I'm the Assistant Manager for Marketing at the National Incubation Center. We're happy to host this series of webinar from Foundher's platform. Foundher is the community of female founders at the NAC. It started off as just the female founders that were on campus, but now we are expanding and bringing together entrepreneurs, leaders, female founders from all over Pakistan and beyond. Through this platform and with the support of the NIC, we are hosting a series of webinars, activities to celebrate the women across the world in honor of Women's Day coming soon on 8th March. Tonight, for this very special webinar titled on celebrating the differences between us, I have with me our guest speaker, Marta. Marta is part of this wonderful organization called Atlas Core. And with more than 8 years of experience in international politics, women's rights, and gender equality, sustainable living, there is so much to learn. And through this webinar, we look forward to tapping onto that potential. Marta, I hope you're well.
Yes, I am, Zunaira. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to start off this webinar series with you. Thank you so much.
Amazing. So Marta, we'll start off with your experiences. You've been working with different organizations, individuals from all over the world. They all come from different backgrounds. How do you think that location and industrial differences, if when you work together, how do you think they bring us together? Or they create any differences? And when you are working towards a shared goal, do they become a barrier?
So let me start off by saying that being able to work internationally with people from all over the world has been probably one of the biggest blessings and privileges that I've been able to have in my life and in my work career. And that is primarily because just by being in a diverse environment, just by being surrounded by people who by default have different ways of acting, different ways of thinking than me, different perception of the world, is on its own very enriching, because they can very naturally, without even trying, bring up ideas, bring up proposals or concepts that I wouldn't normally come up with. Of course, differences can sometimes seem as an obstacle if they are ignored. But one of the very basic rules that I always try to keep in mind when working in an international environment, and having now done this for quite a few years, it almost comes naturally, is keeping this idea in the back of my head that there is no such a thing as normal, that there is no such a thing as universal concept of what is the correct way of behaving or thinking or acting. Because normal is a word that we use a lot, and we are very early on in our childhoods and early adulthoods taught what is normal, what is appropriate and what is not. But the normal this word doesn't mean anything at all without the context. So if we put that word or this phrase, we hang it on the wall just to, keep it there next to us, but without using it consciously, and having this approach of my normal may be very different from the normal of anyone who I'm working with, then it already, makes these barriers less visible or dominant. Another thing is, whenever I start a project or enter a new team that has people from many diverse backgrounds, what I very much like to do is making sure that we are all on the same page in terms of group norms and values that we bring in. Because if we at the very beginning establish what we are here for, what is our common goal, what are the values that will guide us throughout any processes that we may join together, then those cultural differences or differences that may come from our religious background or our particular family background or anything adult that is there that may affect who we are and how we act, those things become, I don't want to say less important, but less visible in terms of acting as an obstacle, because they just, sure, affect how we act and who we are. But if we have already within our smaller group same norms, same rules, this is what is going to guide us, and not perceptions that we bring from home about what is normal, what is appropriate.
That's a really good insight. You talked about working with women and people from all groups with different backgrounds. That brings me to my next question, that when you work with individuals from different backgrounds who have different identities and different values, does that act as a barrier? And how do you deal with it to make sure, as you mentioned, that when you're working with diverse groups, there is always the opportunity that they'll bring in the value that you could never have thought of. So when you work with groups, how do you go about this? How do you ensure that you're getting the most out of it while they're getting some value out of it as well?
So at the very beginning, here I wanted to make a small disclaimer that yes, I have worked with people from many different countries and many different groups, but I am in no way an expert of working with everyone in the world. I am learning as I go, and when working with people from different parts of the world, different social groups, it is always good to keep in mind this aspect of continuous learning. Some experiences that I have had in the past and some learnings that I have gained throughout my professional journeys do guide me in my steps and my behavior right now and in the future. But I always have to keep in mind that nothing is obvious when working in diverse groups, and I always may make a mistake or misinterpret.
Okay, so I think there's this misconception that there's one solution fits all whenever you work in any diverse group. And from what you've shared, what I get is that that's not necessarily true. So we talk about building communities. We talk about bringing together everyone in changing the world, bringing about the change that's much needed. How do you consciously make any efforts? What's your thought process in bringing together people from diverse groups and then creating opportunities for them? Because when we talk about women, we also keep that in mind, that women across the world, no matter where they're from, what country, what background, we need to provide for them equal opportunities. Just your thought process on conscious efforts, how do you go about that? I think we lost Marta. Mirai, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I think we lost Marta. We'll wait for her to reconnect. Everyone who's joined in live today, thank you so much for being here. We've opened the Q&A tab. Any feedback, any questions that you have regarding this session, the topic, please feel free to share it with us. We are also live on Facebook. So our audience that has joined there, we look forward to hearing your thoughts. And in addition to this webinar, we're also doing a series of other webinars that are still connected to the theme, that is breaking the barrier. It's an international theme this year to celebrate the Women's Day. And we at the NIC and Foundher, we take pride in celebrating that and making opportunities for women and minorities, marginalized groups. So next up is we are doing an event at the NIC. It's in-house, but due to COVID restrictions, we're only bringing in limited numbers. So do check that out, and we hope to see you all there. Marta, good to have you back. I'm not sure if you dropped out before the question, so I'll repeat it. Just talking about what you mentioned, when you were talking about people from diverse groups, we always tend to mention communities and building groups and empowering, those communities that don't really get the chance to come forward. So when you're working with anyone, be that any individual from anywhere, what's your thought process in building that community? Because women from all over the world, we think about them and we want to bring equal opportunities for them. So in terms of conscious efforts in building communities, what's your thought process, and how do you think that everyone in their capacity can pitch in to make way for others, and especially women?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And thank you for your patience. I'm not sure what happened with Zoom. You would think that after 2 years of virtual events, this wouldn't happen, but it still does. So when it comes to, as you mentioned, these conscious efforts to help people bring their full self forward in a group and being able to fully contribute, one thing is, again, and I probably will be going back to this thought over and over again. So assuming that nothing is obvious and nothing is going to be in a diverse environment, quote unquote, normal. Now, when we work with people from many different countries, it is very easy to assume that most of the identity that they bring is influenced by their national culture. And that is not wrong per se, just like definitely a big part of who I am and how I act is influenced by me coming originally from Poland. And this is something that people may assume. I don't know if there are any stereotypes that people in Pakistan might come up with about Polish people. Probably not. But then, for example, around Europe, there are quite some. So this will affect how people see me. But then who I am as a person and what I bring to the table is also influenced by many other experiences that I have, which is working in other countries, and then by also different, so to speak, smaller cultures that I belong to. And that may be my community back home, different communities that I have created and worked with throughout my life, things that affect the way I act that relate to, let's say, ideologies that I might subscribe to or not subscribe to, my religious or non-religious background, etc. So this is something to keep in mind whenever working with people that we assume will be different from us, and that is practically any group. That one thing is that national culture that may bring in, and stereotypes are there for a reason. They are a kind of mental tool that we use to categorize and organize the world. And this is something that our brains do almost automatically and unconsciously. But if we have the awareness to also see that there are different layers or like different categories or different communities that every person belongs to that affect the way they are, this will prevent us or help us to not jump into judgments. And so having that awareness that, yes, I may know something or like part of the identity of this person may be helpful in assessing who they are or interpreting how they act. But then there always has to be this caveat of, I don't know everything about this person's life, and then I must be kind of cautious when it comes to interacting with them. Now, how to approach that when working in a group and trying to make sure that everyone can bring their full self forward? First of all is verbalizing or speaking up about those things that I just said. We know that let's say a group of women or anyone from different places, different countries, different communities, have many different parts to your identities. Some of them are more visible and obvious, some of them are not. And making a conscious effort to create a safe space for everyone to be who they are without putting them in boxes that, you know, we may assume they belong in, this is already a great step. Because sometimes people may have to, you know, speak up themselves. Hey, this is who I am. This is the identity that I associate with. This is something that you may not know about me, but I'm here to tell you. If they have a safe space to do so, because we create that space consciously, then we can, you know, allow them to bring it forward. Instead, if we, you know, assume that, okay, you're from this country or you're from this community, you're from this socioeconomic status, and we assume that you will act or behave a certain way, people may indeed fall into those roles, but this is also another way to bring their full capacity and full potential forward.
Yeah. So really interesting point that you just raised, that we tend to form judgments based off of pre-formed, not stereotypes always, but also what we've been told all our lives, or what we see or hear from other people's secondhand experiences. So that's, you know, this is a good point to mention, that this also gives us the opportunity to learn more about other people, other cultures, and instead of making assumptions, we should create that space where they are comfortable opening up about who they are and what they want to do. So it's not just that, you know, I'm open to this and please come to me, but it's also about creating that space where you make them feel comfortable, that they'll be willing to share it with you. So on that point, Marta, when we are talking about differences, there are certain differences associated with gender stereotypes, especially at workplaces. So if we talk about the World Economic Forum's report, World Bank, World Economic Forum, all these global platforms, they estimate that it's going to take another 200 years to bring women to the same pay gap level as men. And that not only troubles me, it also you know, motivates me to think about it as more of a solution, as taking it personal, being a young woman in a country where, as you mentioned, there are cultural bias as well. So when we talk about opportunities at workplaces in terms of gender bias, do you think that the differences that we have, they add to the experiences? Or when we talk about equal responsibilities, equal opportunities, what, in your opinion, could be a fruitful way to go about this while we work towards the goal of achieving the equal gender pay gap, economic pay gap?
Well, if I did have a very, you know, concrete answer or a solution to gender inequity, I would definitely go and speak at the UN General Assembly and hopefully win a prize for it. But I definitely can offer some thoughts that I've had because I have, you know, grown up and lived in this life as a woman, presenting as a woman. So I have experienced a fair share of, well, things that many women in the world experience regardless of the country that they live in. And some of those things are, as you mentioned, inequality at work, lack of access to the same opportunities that men have. And, you know, this is coming from a person that has grown up in Europe, which is doing, so to speak, not terribly when it comes to gender equity, but there are still many, many, many things to solve, because even if we shift in terms of economic policies or in the political discourse to more gender equitable discourse, there are many things that traditionally are still ingrained in the mentality of society, and Polish society is not excluded from that. So when it comes to a workplace, for example, I think visibility is one of the best places to start. Whenever we discuss, for example, quota gender quota of how many women, or maybe to be more inclusive, non-men we should have in a company or in a governmental body. Very often we hear arguments that this will prevent good candidates joining that company or governmental body, and we are just putting people of a specific gender or specific identity into that place. Sure, that argument is to some extent valid, but at the same point, if we do not have specific policies in place to make it even possible for people of non-majority to join and go and work in specific places, then we're not doing anything at all. Making or like creating the new normal where women are present in levels of management or executive levels in companies, in governments, people that of diverse genders are present, this takes time. And this is not a natural process, because we may actually fool ourselves that yes, the recruitment processes are set in a way that it's the best candidate that gets a position. But we know that this is not true, because the way recruitment processes or any sort of application processes are built is to favor men. Of course, I'm generalizing here. This is not, this doesn't go for every company, every governmental body, etc. But if we speak about countries where patriarchy is the dominating system, and that is still the majority of countries in the world to a different extent, this is the practice. So focusing on visibility and bringing people on, people that are diverse, and bring diversity into a workplace or any institution is important. And here, I also would like to mention that this is not, as some may think, to get the diversity points, or, to have this sort of surface diversity. Because one thing that is somehow omitted or not mentioned enough about diversifying efforts is that if you have people of different genders, different religions, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations, different, and name a category of different social categories that you may have in a society, you also bring those different mindsets. And if you have those different mindsets, you can also address whatever you do as an organization to those different groups. So you're not only serving one more or less unanimous group of, let's say, cishet men in the society, because your board or executives are representatives of that group. You also have somebody who can advocate for other target audiences, and you have people who will bring important points that if you belong to a majority, if you don't belong to a marginalized group, you will never even think of some issues or problems that might need to be solved because they don't affect you. So this is, I think, one thing that we should very much keep in mind if we want to perhaps change those 200 years perspective into a little bit less. And this is also where we desperately need allies, especially if we talk about gender equity. This is really a place and a moment for male allies to step up and to say, hey, I actually want to have people that are non-men in my organization, in my company, because I need this perspective that I myself cannot bring because I'm not them.
That's very true.
Is a broad appeal here to our men in the audience to be allies, because we need them to actually create social change.
Absolutely. And I think whenever we talk about women empowerment or gender equity, we always tend to look at women. But I think the scope of this goes beyond just women. Everybody comes together to ensure, as you mentioned, that we need more non-men people in this panel, in this boardroom, on this board of trustees. So yes, allies, they play an important role. And something that you mentioned, the diversity points, I remember reading this case study where it was very well mentioned that diversity is not just bringing together people of different colors, people of different cultural backgrounds, or even genders. It's not just bringing them into an ecosystem, it's also creating an ecosystem that's favorable to them. Because if we don't make an effort in making them comfortable, then we are doing them a disservice. We are making them uncomfortable. We are actually, instead of taking steps forward, we are taking steps backwards, because then they can't bring together their true potential. Then they can't add as much value as they could if the ecosystem favored them. And also, diversity is not just so whenever it's naturally you go around the world and you say diversity, people tend to think in terms of gender first, then maybe race, maybe cultural backgrounds, but it's also age, the age difference, the languages that you speak, different experiences that you bring together. So diversity is really just bringing different people from different thought backgrounds and getting your heads together in maybe coming up with something that one person on their own cannot. So I totally agree with you there. And speaking of allies, how do you feel when, so there is this conversation that when we talk about women are the best representatives of the issues that they face. And while I agree there, I also think the efforts go hand in hand. Allies and the direct effectees, the first-hand experiences, they do bring in the value. So allies, any tips, any thoughts for them, how they can chip in, and what could their role look like in going forward in this point in time, on helping not just women come into the space, but also making this space favorable for anyone from any identity, any background.
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to specifically talking about gender and gender equity, I think the very first thing I would underline when seeking for allyship among men is to really bringing the idea of feminism and making sure that we understand what feminism is. In media discourse, very often you can hear so many phrases or opinions about what modern feminism is, because I also don't mean feminism from, let's say, 1920s. That was not possibly the most equitable there, but in its current form, there is so much more to feminism that we can often hear in the media or what people present it to be. And having potential allies understand that feminism is not flipping the script, that it's not flipping the power dynamic in the sense that now women are on top and now we're going to oppress you in a form of revenge or in a form of, like a twisted sort of game. Absolutely not. Feminism, even though it carries the femme in its name, is about bringing gender equity to us all, because patriarchy and toxic masculinity are things that affect men negatively as well, even if on the surface it may seem that it only and exclusively benefits men. But patriarchy is a toxic system for us all that puts us in boxes because of our bodies and tells us which gender roles we must fulfill in a society solely because of genitalia that we were born with. And when it comes to working, in the social sector, but even if I was, working in different industries, I don't operate on my daily basis at work with, what I have inside of my body and what I don't. So, so making this clear that First of all, the system that we live in is oppressive to us all because as a woman, sure, it tells you what you can, what you cannot do. It makes you perpetually believe that you're less than because of the body that you're born with. It treats you as less than a man that just happened to have a different body. But also as a man, it tells you that you cannot be emotional, that you cannot be weak, that you cannot do this and that because it is unmanly. And this perception of masculinity or femininity in those very strict confines that sometimes are also phrased as tradition is not beneficial to us all if we want to live in a society that is open and diverse and inclusive to all. So having actual those conversations and educating ourselves and educating others about what gender equity means. And again, this is not fight between women and men. This is not some sort of a war on men and what is masculine, not at all. This is a fight not against individuals, but it's a fight or efforts for a systemic change, to change a system that doesn't serve people to bring out their full potential, because again, it defines what they can or cannot do based on the body they're in. And I think this would be the very first thing for me to start with when seeking for allies, having those conversations about what we're actually trying to do, what is necessary, and why being an ally can not only be an act of service for your fellow human beings that happen to be in a female body, but how it can also serve them to be free of social constructs that may completely miss who they are and constrain them in full expression of themselves as human beings.
That's that's very insightful, because oftentimes we make it very complicated when it doesn't need to be. It's as simple as supporting your fellow human beings, whatever vessel they're in. We're all people of potential, and opportunities are out there. It's just about bringing them to the best candidate, regardless of who they are, where they're from, or what they believe in. Marta, this conversation around women empowerment, feminism, women at workplaces, gender equity, this has spiked over over the recent years, maybe 7 years, 10 years, a lot more than. There have been movements, there have been struggles, women to have the chance to vote, to have a bank account, to actually become an active part of the economy. But in the recent years, the conversations have actually started happening on bigger platforms frequently. In your opinion, why do you think that this right now is the time for it? And why having these conversations while we are going through, the Industrial Revolution and the world is as globalized as it's ever been? Why now? Why are these conversations, in your opinion, are happening more frequently now? And what's the need? What's that one goal that we need to get to through these conversations, the dialogues? What are your thoughts on that?
Again, a very multi-layered, multifaceted question, and I have also quite many thoughts on that, although probably not ultimate or complete solutions. But one thing that I've been noticing, apart from just the fact that now people from similar groups can come together through social media and online platforms and actually share experiences and say, hey, you are from a completely opposite, part of the world or side of the world, but actually you're experiencing similar things. And so there might be some systems in place that are not just individual to our countries. So that's of course one thing, just being connected through internet and digital tools. But then one thing that I've been noticing more and more is different groups that are traditionally marginalized. So, for example, women or non-men, and then also groups that are marginalized because of their ethnic background or religious background, race background, etc., coming together as well and realizing, hey, what is happening, or these power dynamics are very similar. There are many different parallels that we can see in a way how patriarchy operates, in a way how white supremacy operates, ableism, and any different forms of systemic oppression that is put in place. And that is also allowing people to come together more en masse. So we are shifting into way of thinking where it's not like, no, now we need to fight for the rights of women. No, now we need to fight for civil rights of Black people, specifically in the US context. Or now we need to now fight for the rights of people with this or that identity. But these different groups are now coming together and realizing you cannot be truly feminist if you are not also anti-racist, because you can't just choose which women you choose to support, right? That it's, for example, women of specific complexion or specific ethnic or religious background. You cannot be truly feminist if you are also not fighting for or advocating for the rights of people with disabilities or people that are neurodiverse. Because again, you cannot just choose which section of women you are supporting. So realizing that there are so many connections between groups that have been historically and traditionally marginalized and not given the voice that would be equal, or like a platform to speak up that would be equal to those that are traditionally in power, is giving more and more momentum to the fight for a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable world. And I think this is something that is very fascinating, because these fights for empowerment of different groups until now have been somewhat isolated. And because there is more research done, and there is also these tools that we can use to connect the dots and realize, hey, we are actually fighting the very same system of oppression that is based on multiple factors, such as white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, ableism. These are all connected, and we can kind of jointly come together to be like, you know what, let's not do that, and start seeing human beings as more than their gender, than their race, than their nationality, etc. So this is something I feel is actually quite a big factor in why now we are so much more heard and visible in the public space. And if it is going to be called wokeness or any other phrase that is being thrown out, sure, yeah, I would rather be woke than asleep. I don't see that phrase at all as in any way derogatory.
Yeah, that's that's a reality check right there, because as we are progressing towards an more equal world, there is a lot of resistance. Marta, any personal experiences of you working with diverse groups, specifically women, that any memory, any personal experience that left something with you, that had a mark on you? I'd love to hear any story from any experience that you've had over the years.
Sure. So speaking in a very general terms, there are always differences when I come to work in a group that has representatives from, let's say, different countries, in terms of not only linguistic abilities, and here I'm talking primarily about English because that has become the main, like the modern lingua franca, especially in Europe where I come from, but then also when working in a broader context, let's say having people representing not only different European countries, but also people from, let's say, Middle East or different parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, etc. Here, more than just linguistic influences that may come, that may be visible as they speak English, there are also those non-verbal aspects that are good to kind of be aware of when working together. And to make it a little more clear what I'm talking about is that in different places in the world, you grow up, again, believing what is normal, what is not, in terms of how loud do you speak? How often do you speak? Is it okay to just, unmute yourself and start speaking and add your voice to the discussion? Or do you sit silently until you are asked to give your opinion and your voice? Is it okay to brag about your achievements and come forward with, fully open about what you bring to the table? Or again, are you inclined, because of how you were raised, to be more humble and, keep to yourselves? And especially when it comes to working with women from different backgrounds, you can see that part about being humble so dominant and so visible, because in many parts of the world, it is not okay, or women are told that it's not okay to brag about their achievements, to be proud about who they are, right? Because it is more natural to be like, keep to yourself. So when coming into a group, let's say working on a project with people from many different parts of the world, this is something that I would have to quite often, I don't want to say manage, but be aware of. That, let's say, if I talk with a Westerner, they might be more upfront, they might be more literal, they may be more outspoken in terms of, for example, here, bringing again, bragging about their achievements or being very open about the background that they have, etc. And if I'm working with people from cultures where patriarchy is very, very dominant, and where those team members may be culturally more socialized to keep to themselves, there they need to be active efforts made to make sure that they also have a chance to speak up, rather than assuming that they will, right? Because if this is not a common practice where they come from, then and of course, this is not to say, forcing anyone to speak up if they don't want to, but giving, again, the platform, or kind of bringing the table to them as well. And this is, again, what we talk about when we mention the word equity, that it's not like, okay, now you have the platform to speak, but this is adjusting to make sure that everyone has actually the opportunity to speak, given the differences that they have. About specific examples of my individual experiences, it is actually not easy to find just one, but I could tell you that over the years, I have really come to a conclusion that it is so much easier for me to work in English in an international group of people rather than Polish, which is my native language, because of English being simpler. That's one thing. Just grammar is way simpler, and it's easier to sound stupid in Polish if you just mix up grammar, but also because it is somehow easier to express emotions and be vulnerable in English, for me personally. That it is a language where I can actually express myself more clearly and more authentically, because I have the phrases and I have the constructs that exist in the language that allow me to come through. Another thing is that I work quite closely with a few people from Finland. I lived in Finland for a year when I was younger, and many of my friends and close co-workers are from there. And one thing that is, again, a stereotype about Finnish people, but a stereotype that quite often comes to be real to some extent, you can actually see it, is that those people are a little more on a quiet side, a little more constrained when it comes to personal aspects, especially in a work environment, that they are people who appreciate silence. And through working with them, I realized, oh my goodness, I love this. Like, let me adopt this style of being and working, because this actually, you know, works with me. So while this is not one specific situation, I have found throughout my work that working with Finns is sometimes much more productive to me and comes more naturally to me because it aligns with my personal style. Now, not, let's say, my culture on a national level, but my culture as a human being, which I suppose here would be called personality. And this is one of the beauties of working in an international environment that I found, that I would find similarities with people who, you know, on a superficial level, I would assume would not be as similar as my countrymen, but actually they are.
Marta, you talked about picking up what you like from cultures, from individuals, your experiences. What's your wish list like for women going forward in this current scenario? What would you wish women had access to, opportunities, better roles? What does your wish list look like?
I think my biggest wish for women all over the world is that we let go of, well, the constructs that we are put in because of our bodies. But again, this is difficult to do because we are members of society. But one thing, or like one avenue that I see as something we could use to get there, is women supporting women. And I feel that this is the most important thing for any woman to do, or a non-men person to do, if we are going to, you know, come together and actually empower each other, is to see that because of the place that we are put in socially, we have so much in common, despite all the other differences that might be there. And some of us, because of the place we were born in and the privilege we were given or gifted with, may have more power and more voice. We must use this voice to speak up for those that have less of it. And women supporting women, to me, should be like a motto or a tagline of the 2020s that we all use and, you know, say out loud and keep in the backs of our heads in our daily lives, to say, you know what, the competition that we are put in somehow by the systems we live in about, you know, who's prettier, who's more this or that, or those ridiculous competitions that we are put in to kind of steer infighting between women. No, we are not doing that anymore. We are supporting each other right now. We are speaking up for our sisters, for our brothers as well, who are in positions of, you know, underprivileged groups. We are not given in to societal constructs that tell us which way to act. Because again, we need to come together to create a systemic social change. And those of us who have a little more power and privilege can now become aware of it and make sure that they use it to support those that don't. Also, while including their voice and not doing it, you know, not coming to it with a bit of a European or colonial mindset of like, I know what's the solution for you, I'm going to help you. No, we are also not doing that anymore. We are now asking people what is their actual need to be able to speak up for them as well, or on their behalf.
Marta, this has been amazing conversation, and to bring this to a close, I'll go ahead with my last question. So you earlier at the start, you mentioned something that we have a lot of learning to do, And I believe in addition to just the learning, we also have a lot of unlearning to do. Going forward, it's not just, as you mentioned, I know the solution, or whenever we talk about women empowerment, we only look towards women for answers to educate not just themselves, but also just the audience at large. While we are trying to understand the changing dynamic, how again in a wish list dynamic, how do you think people should approach others to educate themselves better, and what efforts can they make on their own in understanding not just the differences, but also different cultures, different backgrounds, to understand the similarities that we have? Because I believe that when we get together for work, to socialize, and we spend time with others, we find out that we are not as different as we think. There are a lot more similarities than differences. So when we are working on educating ourselves, how can we approach other individuals, experts, maybe people who are similar to us, and what efforts can we make to educate ourselves on our own?
There are actually quite a few things that individuals can do on a daily basis when it comes to being inclusive in terms of gender. That would be a very simple thing of asking a person that you interact with for their preferred pronouns, or asking how they would like to be addressed, what name you should use when talking with them. This is the very first step to start, to let the other person know, oh, I actually care about you and how you want to be identified as, of how you want to be represented, how you want to be treated. And even if that person is, let's say, completely fine, let's say using pronouns or being addressed in a way they would be perceived using the stereotypes that exist in the society, this creates an avenue actually for a dialogue and creating that safe space. So as individuals, to make sure that we create that safe space for everyone and can be inclusive as possible, is again coming with this mentality of, I don't know everything about this person. And sure, I may have some assumptions, some stereotypes that I use or my brain uses to help me navigate the world, but they are not facts. They are, again, just assumptions. So of course, it may be difficult to be conscious of it all the time, every second, every minute of the day, because we process so much information. We interact with so many people that we have to use these constructs and assumptions and categories that we kind of box people in. But step by step, we can try to unlearn that mechanism or unlearn kind of the automatic way in which this mechanism works in our minds and brains. So keeping in mind that, okay, yes, I will in some way, act as I do, operate normally, but keeping this caveat in your head, this kind of asterisks, there might be some things that will be surprising. And it is also my responsibility as a empathetic human being to ask the other person, why do they act the way they act? If there is something surprising, and here in a non-judgmental way, but in a way to understand acting people why they are the way they are. Or, if we cannot ask why, then just simply asking, hey, is this the way you act? Is this the way that you prefer? Okay, and it might be different from my way of doing things, my way of thinking. That is completely fine, because the idea of whether it's a nation or any sort of social group being the same is, that's a fallacy. That is not something that has ever existed. And in the process of building a nation or being any sort of unity, we will talk about similarities, but we must be aware of those differences, and only then we can use them creatively to actually advance in any sort of project or initiative that we may be doing.
Talking about the differences, you mentioned that it might be difficult to reach out to everyone in efforts to accommodate them. Do you think the word difficult comes from us being too comfortable in looking at the world from one specific lens? We've made peace with how things have been for years now, and now that things are changing, we may not be uncomfortable with this, but we do find it a little difficult, and that's where the conscious effort comes in. There are still parts to this where we still believe that the older model is the superior model, and we still want to stick to it. How do you think that we can draw a contrast between how things were and how they are now? And if we can at all, identify the differences, what was better, and if we are moving toward this, then how do we convince everyone and take them along on doing these things with us as an ally or as a first-hand experiences?
Well, this notion of discomfort, I think, is very, very important here, because progress and learning by default are not comfortable. And it might be very, very natural to actually oppose it, because change, especially when it's misunderstood or not understood at all, is an uncomfortable feeling. Again, for those who are affected in a society by any sort of policy or societal systemic solutions that are not equitable, that are in one form or another oppressive, those people don't really have a choice to just stick with the status quo, because the status quo is uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable for those who benefit from the status quo and want to maintain it because they benefit from the way things are, and they don't want to change it because they don't see the point of it. Then there is also a very common misunderstanding or misconception that bringing some marginalized groups to the platform where they can speak and have their voices heard, and where they can have equal rights and equal access to opportunities and anything that is considered valuable in a society, will bring the other groups that have been traditionally on top down. That is, again, not really factual. Of course, from the perspective of the person who's on top, it might seem that they are going down, but they are not. Giving access to opportunities or any sort of resources to everyone does not mean that they will become extinct. This is a sort of binary thinking that we need to unlearn. That power or opportunities or resources are not a finite resource or a thing that we must strive for, and that if I'm going to be living a fulfilling life with all the rights that are there, that I might have as a human being, that suddenly somebody else will have less. Human rights and access are not, as I said, a finite resource. So this is, again, something to really talk about and make sure that everyone understands this. And this binary vision of the world where we have to compete against each other for rights or access or resources is something that inherently comes with the economic systems that many countries choose to work with, and that's fine. In a market-driven economy, competition is something that is very natural and needed. But we don't need to copy and paste it over to social relations to make it seem that we need to compete for rights or access or resources. I have probably diverged quite a lot from your question, so if you wanted to go back to it. feel free to ask that again.
No, I think that brings the point home that it's not a competition. They're not limited resources. Giving other people opportunity does not mean that we're taking it and then giving it to somebody else. It's just creating equal opportunities for everyone. And that does not mean that when we are giving opportunities to one group, that means that we neglect the other groups. Marta, thank you so much for joining us today, and really insightful discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed it as well. We'll see you again soon. It was a pleasure to have you at the NIC and for our platform of Foundher. And we hope to engage with you more often now for discussions and opportunities like this. Any last thoughts, any comments that you have?
Well, I just wanted to thank you so much for having me. It is always a pleasure to talk specifically on these topics of diversity and intercultural communication and cooperation, because this is truly my field and something that I feel super passionate about. I know that I may go sometimes into very abstract concepts and very big picture things, but this is also part of it, and I believe this is super important to talk about. Thank you so much to Foundher, to National Incubation Center, and to you, Zunaira, for inviting me. If anyone from our audience wishes to connect with me, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and to connect. I am always happy to continue these conversations and to connect with other inspiring social change leaders around the world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marta. I have already shared your LinkedIn with our audience, and I hope that we'll be creating more opportunities with you and on these lines super soon. Thank you everyone for joining in. This is all from our side today. We do have more webinars and activities planned in the coming days throughout the month of March. So do keep an eye out for those announcements on our social media platforms, and we'll be happy to engage you in these discussions. Thank you, Marta. Take care and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.